all right, I have to introduce you, and so, man, I might have to edit this crazily and like add some of this stuff later on.
You know what you can do? You can edit it and just say, hey, look, we just started getting on a rant and went off on the rails, and just copy and paste it. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. All right. I actually got
a jacket, bro.
I gotta introduce you.
It's the ledge. The ledge between Metro and Homo is now
bridging that gap. So I finally get Jack Kruse on the show again here on the Primal Edge Health Podcast. Jack's a neurosurgeon, and for a living, he cuts people's heads open. And for a hobby, he likes to blow people's minds. He's also incredibly generous with his time. He's always answering people's questions on social media. He spends hours of his day just helping people out for free. So Jack's on a mission. He's no doubt one of the most intelligent, dynamic characters out there talking about health. He actually is also now an open metrosexual with his jacket. He's got a unique perspective on health and the human organism. And he's tying in biology and medicine with quantum physics. And he's bold enough to go out there and say that everything is not about food, that health's not all just about food. How crazy is that? And how crazy is it that Jack says that everything in our body, that all the systems are open and connected to each other, and everything functions as in like a unified field. So I'm here to talk about Jack's theories, what he's discovered in his practice and in his life. And on the last podcast, we talked about why ketosis isn't all about beef, how the real key to it is DHA. We talked about the importance of a strong electric and magnetic current to maintain healthy mitochondria and make energy in your body, and why DHA is the most important nutrient. So if you want to get caught up on that, you can check out the other podcasts. I don't want to get into a lot of the same stuff because Jack is an encyclopedia of information. So I'm going to jump right into it and just say good morning to Jack over there in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm here in Ecuador. So what's up, Jack?
Not much, man. I'm just sitting here rocking a new jacket. I had to break out a purple one just for you.
Jack wore this jacket just to spite me because I've got no style and I wear the same damn clothes every day. So
I told you I felt bad the last time we podcasted. I had bad hair, I was hungover, and I was in a bathrobe. I said, I need to elevate my game for you.
Right, so we had some comments in the last podcast, and we actually I was more interested in Jack's idea than his ideas than I was in his physique at the time. And Jack, I noticed you've lost maybe like at least 20, 30 pounds since the last time I talked to you. So what's up? Why were you fatter last time? What's going on?
It went for the biohack that I did in 2014, which is what you alluded to in the beginning. I basically ate a paleo diet out of two of those popular paleo books that you well know. And I did that for 8 months. I stopped doing CT. I actually stopped eating a lot of seafood. And the whole goal was to get most of my DHA from organ meats and skeletal meats to prove a point that just eating a diet and focusing on macronutrients and foods, you could still gain weight if you're in a really bad environment. And it was a precursor to this ubiquination series that I'm currently in. And I want to show people in the low carb, high fat, and the paleo community that they're missing a big ticket. It's not food, it's about light. And light is the absolute key. And what people don't realize in biology and health, no one understands how light works, but there is one really cool way to make the linkage. Everybody knows that plants use light, okay? And plants don't eat. That's the interesting part of plants. But yet, just like Tristan is alive, at one time the wood that's on that wall behind him also was alive in a tree, and that tree didn't need to eat. And the reason it didn't need to eat is because the canopy of that tree was constantly in the sun 100% of the time, connected to its world, and its root system was also connected to the magnetic field. See, when you live a completely connected life, you don't need to eat. And what I'm fundamentally showing people, and what I showed them in 2014, that the same thing was true in us. And it was very counterintuitive. I told people at the stage in Pasadena that I gained 42 pounds by following what someone would say is a really healthy platform. And then I flipped the switch on September 1st and went back to doing it Jack Kruse's way. And a lot of people who were at the meeting were like, dude, why would you go and lose 157 pounds, 10 years ago and then try to gain weight back I said, because I'm trying to prove a point here. I'm trying to prove that it isn't about food. And here's the bigger thing. The other point that I try to prove is a little bit counterintuitive. You have to read between the lines. What is it? Is that the laws of physics are bidirectional, meaning they're time invariant. So I knew that I could lose the weight like that. It was not a big issue, but I had to show guys like you that maybe there's something to this. And then you could start going, the reason why it's really good news for everybody in our species is because it means all of us can change and adapt because the laws of physics allow that to happen. The problem is you're not going to be really successful if you focus predominantly on food. And Tristan, you know, because of the conversations that we've had here and before we started this podcast, even on Facebook, that I've been adamant that you look at some of the guys in low carb, high fat, or paleo, they're not getting the results, you know, that you really want because they're focusing just on food. They're missing the big issue, which is light and circadian biology, and how the interaction between light and nitrogen determine how you use carbon from food. And the only reason humans or animals, let's keep it even simpler, need to eat is because we're designed by evolution to move across the tectonic plates and outside the sun's domain. We're not 100% connected by evolutionary design. Therefore, we have to have backup systems in us. Those backup systems are called mitochondria, and those mitochondria need electrons from food in order to allow us to live a partially disconnected life normally. The problem today is that we are more disconnected as a species than we ever have become. Why? Because humans are the only mammal on this planet that create their own environment. And that fundamentally is a big problem.
So when you say disconnected, in your blog, you write a lot about the importance of like circadian rhythms and how everything, including processes in our body, are not just linear and static, how everything is constantly in flux with our environment. So when you say disconnected, what are we disconnected from, and how do we reconnect? What's up?
Well, I mean, I think you know the answer to that question. It all comes down to what I told you in the Energy and Epigenetics 4 blog post. I would tell anybody who's listening to this podcast, just go read the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of that blog and be prepared to see something that you probably missed. We are disconnected from the sun. We're disconnected from the Earth's magnetic force and its flux. We're disconnected from normal light cycles. In fact, we've added blue light constantly to our environment at all hours of the day, 24/7. In other words, using light alone, it's 24/7 summertime, no matter where a human is on this planet. And while we're doing it, we're also using a microwave device that's bidirectional called a cell phone. We're talking on computers. We're doing Zoom podcasts. I mean, several guys like Jimmy Moore makes his living doing nothing but this, and he thinks that nutritional ketosis will save him. Well, all you have to do is look at pictures from 2005 to now. What do the laws of physics say about this? Laws of physics say that if you bathe yourself and live and swim in a sea of blue light for 10 years, regardless of what you eat, you are going to uncondense your matter, get bigger, and not do well. And I know Jimmy eats the way he tells people to eat. He's definitely ketotic. There's no question about it. Look at the results. See, this famous guy, Tristan, that we all talk about, Einstein, he said, when you keep doing the same shit over and over again and expect a different result, that's called insanity. And I want people to realize ketosis has a role, but you need to know the role. Just like an oncologist would tell someone that chemotherapy and radiation therapy have a role in cancer, I look at ketosis as the same tool in my tool shed that chemotherapy is or radiation is. It's a break on the system that you get that allows you time to change the environment in which you got sick. And here's the counterintuitive part. People think that sickness is endogenous in us, and I don't. I believe the environment is where we get the sickness from, and it's our job to get out of the environment when you're sick. To me, it's idiotic to stay in the same environment that you got sick in. I mean, you are a walking freaking textbook example of that. You lived in California, you picked up your roots, and then you said, okay, I'm going to live in Ecuador off the grid. You know, you said it in our last podcast, how incredibly powerful that was for you and your family. And I guess what the question you just asked me, I'm explaining to you why you fundamentally felt in your intuition that you needed to do that. See, there's science behind why you made those choices. And I want other people to realize you don't have to go to the measures that you did, but some people do. Some people live in a really toxic environment of non-native EMF and blue light, and they don't realize it. And I think Jimmy's one of those guys, and he's got millions of people that follow him. What is my concern as a physician? That they're not going to understand that it isn't about food. That's why the biohack had to be done in 2014. So I can show the world that, hey, look, I used ketosis, I used food, I ate that famous paleo diet in Kruse and Rob Wolf's book, and I still gained weight on it. And you should have seen the people's faces in Pasadena. They were like, for real. People, it's been very interesting to me. People think that I'm going after like Jimmy or Rob and this, and I'm not. What I'm trying to do is point out to people what their dogma is so that you see it. I want to make sure people see what their dogma is. I personally like these guys, but I can tell you, they don't know what to make of me. They've got all these preconceived notions of kind of what I am. And I'm not part of their problem. I'm part of their solution. The problem is they just don't get it. And they don't like the delivery. They don't like the way I do it. And the reason I do it that way is because I view that some of their dogma is doing as much damage as, you know, you taking a lens implant out.
The calories, like, were you counting calories? Yeah. So, I mean, in a very different way, you're kind of showing that the whole calories in, calories out thing is a crazy, I mean, it's such a narrow view of it.
Well, you know, the reason why the calories in, calories out, when you really understand it, is it's a closed, it's thermodynamically closed. That's the only way calories matter. And what I'm saying in this current series, what I just did in a webinar, which blew people's minds, is I showed you that we are open at the most fundamental levels. In the webinar, I talked about carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. Those are the things, the atoms that make up every single piece of proteins and carbohydrates in you, any kind of organic matter. Each one, its own cycle, is open in the world. And did I take it, each one of those atoms, and show you how they were open and how they're recycled by nature?
So the one that everybody knows about is carbon, right? I mean, so how is carbon, how do levels of carbon in our body, carbon dioxide and other forms, how is that an open system? Do you want to maybe go ahead and...
Let's think about it the simplest way, because I don't want to get too detailed on the biology, but let's make it simple. Go outside and look at a tree right now, Tristan. What is it? What's its exhaled gas? Oxygen. No, oxygen.
It breathes in carbon dioxide, exhales oxygen.
And what do? You do exactly the opposite. That is a coupled system. That's the easiest way to understand. That is carbon exchange, how it happens. I've said this to people on social media, and it catches them by surprise. A tree is made out of thin air. And when you hear that, the first time, your first visceral reaction is, that's total bullshit. Then you think about it. CO2 is thin air, isn't it? Makes up 0.37% of the atmosphere. People don't even realize that's how small it is. But guess what? That's the major food source for trees and plants. And you take sunlight with a golf club swing, knock oxygen out, and it makes carbon that makes a tree, like that wood that's behind you and the wood that's behind me. And it's shocking. And from that interaction, sugars are made from sunlight and nitrogen. What is a photosynthetic core made out of in a plant? Nitrogen. And guess what? Stop for a minute, because we're talking trees and plants. Now I want to take people to biology, to our cytochrome 1. What's there? NAD positive and NADH. What does the N stand for? Nitrogen. Isn't that interesting that animals and plants use nitrogen at their most key places where they make energy? And isn't it interesting that plants use light and we tend to use electrons that carry light on them, called photons?
So NAD positive is something that a lot of people are talking about now in relation to like health and longevity, and immune function. Do you want to get a little bit more into that?
Yeah, well, this is what I would tell people. Seminal paper, and I'm getting ready to talk about this paper very soon on the blog, but it's a good way for you to open up the door. Everybody needs to go read David Sinclair's paper. It was the December of 2013. I think it was in Cell Metabolism about NAD positive. And you're absolutely right that one of the things that we know as people age, or they age faster, or their redox is lower, that levels of NAD positive drop off the cliff. We also know that almost every Neolithic disease out there is also associated with this. So you start to realize that this is kind of like a final common pathway. I personally believe that quantum biology is going to take foothold when biologists realize what is going on in photosynthesis. See, we have a photosynthetic battery in us. It's designed to be operational at different parts of our life. And I believe very shortly, people are going to look at that photosynthetic core in a plant and realize that we're doing the same thing at cytochrome 1. And the reason why this gets really complex is people don't realize why cytochrome 1 is incredibly important, because when shit goes bad there, cytochrome 1 is almost always next to where mitochondrial DNA is. So when things go bad there, mitochondrial DNA goes bad. Those are the things that code for the cytochrome protein. So
cytochrome that's part of the cellular matrix.
Yes,
can you just briefly explain what cytochrome 1 is?
Yeah, well, cytochrome 1 is actually where we take electrons. NAD positive gets electrons and forms NADH. Basically what it is it's the first coupled system of electron chain transport in mitochondria. Generally, at that level, most carbohydrate electrons, that's where it enters. Fats tend not to enter at that, their electrons at that level. It comes at cytochrome 2. But the key issue is that's where also mitochondrial biogenesis goes, because when we make free radicals, the number one is superoxide. Superoxide in pulse form, not chronically, actually stimulates new mitochondrial function. So
free radicals aren't bad necessarily.
No, they are never bad. Well, I shouldn't say that, but I gotta be accurate here. In context, they are very, very good. They can be bad when we make too much of them and we can't get rid of them. See, we have two enzymes, superoxide dismutase 1 and 2, that take care of the first two free radicals to keep it so that we have pulse. We just need pulses. All free radicals are made from oxygen. What happens in electron chain transport, it's very interesting. You have an iron and a copper atom, or sometimes iron and magnesium, and they hold oxygen together. Why? Because of what I told you a long time ago, that oxygen's paramagnetic. What does that mean? It has an unpaired electron, so that means it's drawn to magnetic fields. Mitochondria are tiny electron nanomagnets. So oxygen stays there, and the interaction between these two atoms pulls an electron off. That's what a free radical is. So when you pull one of those electrons off, you make superoxide. And this happens at an atomic basis. So if the distance between, say, that iron or copper, or the iron and magnesium is off because you can't make the proper proteins, guess what? You can't make free radicals. If you can't make free radicals, that's how you wind up being Jimmy Moore, because you have no superoxide pulse. These are things that are on the inner mitochondrial membrane. Here's the interesting thing. If you look, mitochondria comes from bacteria.
Yeah.
Bacteria use different metals than we usually do. We have these metals that are based in our ancestral history from how we stole that mitochondria from a bacteria. The thing is, the atomic structure of where it is critical. It goes back to Sinclair's paper. What is he saying? When you lose the ability, in other words, when you stretch too far away, there's too many angstroms, you can't keep oxygen there to strip off and make a free radical. That's the reason why you can't make it. So what does this all tie to? It ties back to the geometry of how big or small your mitochondria is. And this is when we get back into mass equivalence. I'm trying to get you guys to understand that all these little small things, like we can zoom in to see what's happening between these two atoms and how it holds oxygen there. But then you have to go back out and realize, okay, what's happening when I look at a mitochondria through an electron microscope? Well, it's getting bigger. Okay. And what's a dead mitochondria look like that has no energy left in it? It's all shriveled up, you know, and because it's dying. But on its way to death, it's getting bigger. It's getting fatter, kind of like people do. And that's exactly what happens in a star. A star, as it's dying, gets bigger. See, this is where Einstein's brilliance comes in, because the laws of physics are universal. They happen in Ecuador, they happen in New Orleans, they happen in Jimmy Moore's mitochondria. They happen everywhere. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is when you start to see the world through thermodynamic lenses, you begin to start to see, this is interesting. The path that I think people should go to really fundamentally understand this is what I told you earlier. You need to understand photosynthesis. Why? Because quantum physicists now know it happens in leaves. It's nice to see people in other fields begin to go through the same metamorphosis that I went through, and they see the same things from a totally different, profession. And we now know, let's fast forward 2010. We now know that photosynthesis has, 30 to 39 quantized steps. Every single step in the process is quantized. That means that every single step in us, in oxidative phosphorylation and mitochondria, is also quantized. The difference is we just don't know. We don't have the resolving capability in our experiments yet to figure out precisely how it works in us. But here's the key. We know that it exists. And what I'm trying to tell you guys, when you really start reading about photosynthesis, you're going to see that nitrogen is the key element. And why is that important? What series am I in now, Tristan? We're talking about ubiquination. What's ubiquination? The first coupled system in biology, how light and nitrogen interact to couple to the cell cycle and then the metabolism. The thing that you asked me in the beginning, Jack, why did you do the biohack that you did to gain weight? Well, what did I just tell you? The first coupled system is light and nitrogen. The third coupled system is food. So food's not even second. It's third.
What's the second coupled system?
Cell cycle. The cell cycle. That's why cancer is exploded in the last 120 years, which goes to the point that's in Sinclair's paper. We know that when biology is uncoupled, when ubiquination is uncoupled from the cell cycle and it's uncoupled from metabolism, what happens? NAD positive drops. What else happens? No superoxide is made in a body. What happens? Thermodynamically get bigger. Jimmy Moore is the ideal person to really look at and understand this because he's well known and he's eating nutritional ketosis constantly for 10 years. But just follow him on Twitter and you can see him getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he doesn't realize why.
And how is the ubiquitin cycle becoming uncoupled? What's creating that?
It's very simple. You already said it earlier. Blue light. Because guess what? What's in sunlight, Tristan? Think about Pink Floyd's album, from 1970. When that ray of light comes in and hits a prism, 1/7 of light is blue. Today, what we're talking on right now, what's sitting above my head is 100% blue light. So here's where the dose makes the toxin. The blue light, effectively for mitochondria, when you jump down this rabbit hole, is equivalent to eating 14 cheesecakes a day. Now, is that hyperbole? Sure, it is. But is the science behind that there? Yes. What happens with excessive blue light? It changes the photons that are present on our inner mitochondrial membrane, and it spreads those two atoms apart. What happens? Cytochrome C, which is in position 3 in that inner mitochondrial membrane, releases. When that releases, all hell breaks loose. In other words, you take a Ferrari and turn it into a Nissan Sentra blowing black smoke like that.
So is that what creates the Warburg metabolism, where glucose metabolism is upregulated?
Yeah, it can. And that's what happens in people who wind up developing cancer, because what does that mean? That means ubiquination is uncoupled from cycle 2, which is the cell cycle. Because guess what is interesting? Carbohydrates actually are designed, which is where electrons from cytochrome 1 feed in, is a natural break for light. In other words, it makes sense when you really think about this from an evolutionary perspective. You would want to use carbohydrates as a break for an uncoupled light environment because that's what plants do. And we do the same thing, but people don't realize it. People think that carbohydrates are the cause of cancer. I don't. I realize that when those two cycles are coupled like this, I want you to realize life happens in the overlap of those two circles. What we're talking about today is these two circles are uncoupled. Light and nitrogen are uncoupled from the cell cycle. That's when cancer happens. What Warburg metabolism is the body being uncoupled and us misreading what we're seeing. See, the natural break on mitosis, which is how cells divide, is the carbohydrate pulse that we get from superoxide. Mm-hmm. Well, you lose that, and guess what happens? When you lose that, that's what sets up a Warburg metabolism. It's not the disease, what I'm trying to say to you. It's a symptom of an uncoupled biology. And that's why I made the point that people who are heavy, because, let's face it, me and Jimmy had the same disease. Jimmy's persists. I've gone back and forth. I did it on purpose. I've not had the problems Jimmy has because I'm looking at it fundamentally differently from an atomic standpoint. I don't bring food into it. You know me well enough alone to know that I tell you the only food that really matters is DHA, because you need it, because you take light and turn it into a DC electric current in your eye, and that runs your circadian clock. Well, guess what? What is the circadian clock all about? It's about cycle one. It's about having the ability to take sunlight and make the appropriate signal called the DC electric current so it gets into your brain, so the clock here in your eye runs faster than the clocks everywhere else. And when you look deeper into this, you start to realize that mammals, every mammal on this planet, in front of every gene, has a peer 1 and peer 2 circadian clock gene. Why would that be the case? Well, it's simple, because you have to yoke things, arrivals and deliveries in your cells to make it work. So I gave you the example in a blog post, and we'll discuss it here now because it's very simple to get. I want you to think about GPS devices. GPS devices, like Garmin devices, how do they work? Up in space, there's satellites flying with atomic clocks in them. They have to run 38 microseconds faster than your GPS device on Earth. Why? If they don't, okay, you're going to be off 10 kilometers in distance. How good would 10 kilometers be in Ecuador if you were off? You'd be freaking hosed. But do you know why it has to run faster? Here's where physics comes in, bro. It's called gravitational lensing. Why? Because light bends with gravity. And people are like, I didn't realize that. Well, guess what? The distance between your brain and your feet, 6 feet, you don't perceive that distance making a big deal for light, but it does for the cells in your body. And when you cannot run your clock here faster than all your other clocks, guess what happens? Circadian biology becomes uncoupled from cycle 2. That's what happens. And it's not arguable anymore. The science is there. The problem is nobody is talking about it. They're talking about food. You cannot, what you use ketosis for is a break on the system to deliver electrons without bringing carbohydrates into it to change the environment you're in. It buys you time to recouple. You have to begin to realize that instead of living in a blue light world with non-native EMF, you need to mitigate that risk, recouple, and then you can start to achieve the things that you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. All food is a tool. That's all it is. And the point that I made in the beginning of this podcast, and I'm saying it to you again, remember, the most coupled thing that's alive on this planet is a tree, and it doesn't need to eat food, okay? I'm telling you, to get wellness, you have to start to realize that you have to recouple and start doing things that a tree normally does. Because the reason you got sick is because you're completely uncoupled. And you're doing it because of choices that you made. And we're not talking choices like that are willpower or, food choices, this, that. We're talking about things that you do in your environment that are ruining your mitochondria.
So we're talking about light, dark cycles, day and night. It's almost like if we live in a city and it's full of blue light, artificial light all the time, it's like it's summertime and daytime 24 hours a day.
Correct. That's exactly what it is. And see what happens, what would happen with that to a tree? And let's take the example. That does happen on Earth, doesn't it? Up above the 59th latitude. And you want to know you want to know what's funny about that, Tristan? Go on Google after, and you'll see there's no trees there. They don't grow. You know why? You can't go a period of time where it's completely dark or completely light and be a tree. All you see is like mosses and herbs. That's called permafrost. That's what's up there when the temperature allows it.
And
See,
also at high enough altitude, there's a tree line, and even grass doesn't grow when you go up above like 12,000, 15,000 feet.
Now you're starting to realize how living things are coupled to the quantized ecosystem they're in. See, here's the counterintuitiveness of Jack Kruse. I'm trying to use things that you know exist, but you've never thought about them in these ways, how it relates to you. And I'm telling you, the key to really understanding my madness or my genius is understanding photosynthesis and understanding it really well. Because once you realize that this is a quantized system, the leap to cytochrome 1, dude, is not hard. And you're going to start to realize that, man, I really need to fix my environment more than I need to worry about my food. The only thing I need to worry about in Ecuador is keep making that long trip to get oysters and shellfish and things like that, because I got to run this clock faster than everything else. You've made a huge change between going from California to Ecuador, because the amount of non-native EMF that you face is tremendously changed. And I know after talking to you enough from these 2 podcasts that you didn't even realize why you really did what you did, but you actually saved your life, improved your family's outcomes by doing this, because you listened to that intuitiveness. That was the quantized being inside you that is connected to your environment, and you realized the environment that you were in was not good for you or your family. And you picked up and did something that most other people, probably your friends, said, you're freaking batshit crazy. There's no way I'm going to go live on the equator. Here's the teaching point for you, bro. When you live on the equator, you're more like a tree and you're much less like a mammal. Think about that for a minute. You are a much bigger photosynthesizer than not. And I'm going to tell you specifically that you don't need as much DHA as a cat that lives up in Sweden who doesn't have normal light cycles. See, at the equator, you always have 12 hours of light and darkness pretty much around the clock. That's why they call it Ecuador. It's at the equator, okay? So you need to realize that you need to live more like a tree. You can get away with more carbohydrates. Why? Because you're yoked to light. I mean, I'm looking behind you as we talk. Sun has just come out. I can see the rays of light over your left shoulder, you know, and that's the power of your move. And what I want people to understand, when they listen to this, they may say, man, this is really counterintuitive, but it's not. It's how nature works. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is how nature really does work. Because when you begin to see it, then you start looking at you and go, you know, the way I'm thinking about, you know, how I'm building and creating my life is really my big problem. And that's what my biohack, you know, taught. I already knew the answer. Why did I do it? To show guys like you, like, damn. And why did I go live and do this? I wanted you to see my fat ass. I wanted you to see what it was like so you can see that what I'm telling you actually works. I want people out there like Jimmy. I want to help Jimmy. But you can't help somebody who doesn't want help, who is behind a belief paradigm that it's all about food. And you know, especially you specifically, you know that I've been pounding the table for a long time that it's not food. And when I say it, it offends people in the beginning because that's what their dogma is. In this series that I'm in right now, I am laying the wood to this principle. Food is a tool, just like drugs are a tool, just like vaccines are a tool, just like x-rays are a tool, just like chemotherapy is a tool. And I need people to understand that it's true what I'm saying. Why? All you have to do is look at a tree or a plant. It doesn't need food and it's alive. And when you live on the equator, you're much more like a tree and a plant. When you live closer to the poles, you need more DHA in your battery. And that's kind of how it works, bro. It's really that simple. And can you be a person, you know, like the Inuits and live on the equator and completely screw it up? Yeah. If Tristan all of a sudden decides to become, you know, a non-native EMF, Bluetooth loving, blue light eating guy like Jimmy is, you know, say you decide to take over his internet empire, same thing's going to happen to you. See, even though you live in a good area, can you screw that up? Yeah, because you're the only mammal on this planet that can change its own environment. And see, that's why I know there's hope for guys like Jimmy, because eventually I think he's going to come to this realization that it isn't food, and he's not going to want to talk about it because his money is tied to this issue. I'm trying to shed light on this for people who aren't thinking this way, because I believe fundamentally that you can learn some pretty amazing things from people even when they're making mistakes. I can tell you, I've learned more. I told you this earlier today. I've learned more from people who are bad teachers, bad examples in neurosurgery than I did from people who were spot on. Why? Because it shows you the boundaries of kind of where we are. And the smartest people in the world, in my opinion, are people that learn from other people's mistakes. Why? Because they realize that those mistakes are a belief paradigm, and you have to challenge yourself all the time. I constantly challenge what I believe. I question everything. When I was in the Philippines, dude, some of the conversations I had with doctors, they were like, so basically you're saying, I'll tell you exactly what the story was. It was an ophthalmologist, and after he heard the talk about, cataracts and what they fundamentally are, he said, so you're saying that this is a protective mechanism in the eye, and I'm going and taking that out and putting a clear lens in, and I'm making them sicker. I said, that's exactly what I'm saying. And you could see in his face the energy just drained, because he realized, remember, he's making his money doing this. So I know
cataract being a protective mechanism for artificial light, like it's just trying to gloss it over.
Right. And that's what the brain's trying to do. It's trying to protect itself from the blue light. And then
I think I remember that somewhere in your blog.
Yeah, it is. It's in the blog somewhere. But when I said it to him, it was before it was ever on the blog. And I said it in a meeting. And he came up to me after the meeting and wanted to talk about this issue, because he realized when he read his own literature that people got sicker after having lens implants in, and he didn't know why. And when I told him the reason why, he was like, you could see this guy makes probably 90% of his money from this operation. So you've got the professional and economic issue, but the thing that caught him really off guard was that he realized he was hurting his patients. Yeah. And no doctor, at least that I know in my profession, is in this to hurt people. Not one of them. You may get pissed off at them, as a patient, because you say, hey, you're not helping me. But I can tell you right now, people in my profession really do care about people. And when they find out that there may be an issue, dude, I remember 10 years ago how it was for me when I realized some of the surgeries that I was doing were actually hurting, not helping people. I just stopped doing them. When these things filter through to my profession, I've said this to Gretchen, I'm going to say it to you here. It's really important for you guys to realize you need to help your doc. Patients don't, it's almost like a one-way street between doctors and patients. You guys just take. But I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to help your doc. And Gretchen's a perfect example of this. I told her this 4 years ago. She went out and built the relationship with her doctor to create the doctor she wanted. Yeah. That is a very powerful thing to do.
Now her doctor sets an hour block every time she goes to see her.
Right, because you know why? The doctor is getting something from Gretchen that he doesn't get from other patients.
Yeah.
A doctor will not get burned out when he knows that the patient is all in and really wants to get better. And I'll tell you, it's a really rewarding thing for a physician to have patients that just totally dig it.
Yeah, I think people really need to read Jack's blog. A lot of the stuff that we talked about, he's just breaching the surface of a lot of these topics, and his blog goes way deeper into detail, and it goes far down that rabbit hole. Everyone should check out. I mean, I don't know, where's a good starting place for people to start reading your blog?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think the easiest thing to do is actually to read the book, because it really cuts through the first 2.5 years of the blog and makes it very digestible. Then I think one of the cool places is actually just start reading some of the optimal journals on my forum. And what happens is the people that you meet on my forum have been with me 4 and 5 years. When you ask a question there, they direct you to where your problem is. In other words, read this thread, read that thread. I mean, Tristan, we've got a group on Facebook, the quantum health thing. How many times do we start a discussion there about some esoteric thing? And all I do is put a link to something on my forum, and boom, you're like, whoa, it's there.
Jack's forum, Jack's website, it's one of the most in-depth forums, and it's full of people that are just loaded with knowledge and actually applying it in their lives. It's a really fascinating forum. So everyone should check that out at, jackkruse.com, right?
Right. And you go /forums. And I would tell you, I answer questions. I make myself, accessible through the website. I even have an Ask Jack part of the website where you can ask a question. If you have a very specific question about your context, I respond to things on Twitter as long as it's, reasonable. I do it on Facebook. If I can, my job is to help people who want to be helped. I can't help people that don't want to be helped. And my goal is just to share this information with people so that you look at it. And I guess the other thing I would tell, where you need to really start, you need to read some books. And the books that I tell people to read: Jim L. Khalili, Life at the Edge; Gerald Pollack's Fourth Phase of Water; Andrew Marino's Going Somewhere; Robert Becker's The Electric Body; Cross Currents. Those two books, you cut through those 5 books after you listen to this podcast, and I think you're going to come back and go and re-listen to this podcast, or the first one you and I did, and people are going to go, wow, man, this is something, this is a rabbit hole that I never saw. And then jump down it. Then try that for a period of time. Do your own biohack, hack yourself, and then come back and tell me, am I crazy, or maybe do I see something that other people don't see? And did I use trees and plants to actually see this side of biology and see how it's built in us? Absolutely. I did that 10 years ago. This rabbit hole for me has been a remarkable journey. And what my journey is now is to share with guys like Tristan, share with people like you guys listening to this. I want people to fundamentally know why they're pissed off in their doctor's office. Because guess what? Your doctor doesn't know physics. I didn't know physics. Not the way I needed to know it. We now have easy books to read. You read Jim L. Khalili's book, and you will see very clearly that physicists did not believe in 2007 that leaves on a tree are quantum computers. Now we know it's true. The next step is that mitochondria are exactly the same thing. And it will be proven. You notice how I'm being definitive here, bro. It's not a question anymore. You need to elevate your game to realize that something really big is happening in biology, and it's happening in a big way. And you just have to decide, do you want to be part of it, or do you just want to keep, living the same year of over 80 times and call it a life? That's not my idea of freaking optimal anything.
So where is this leading? I mean, you seem to be on the cutting edge of thought within medicine and tying it to quantum biology. Where is this heading? Where do you see medicine going in the next 10 years? Are we
anywhere in 10 years? Because guess what? It takes 25 years to be in the literature and then get to clinical medicine. Here's the irony. The problem is, if you understand evidence-based medicine, it's fundamentally broken, because right now we have all these people, PhDs. The only reason they do the research they do is so they can get money from the NIH to get and study things that don't matter. They're not studying the right things. Guys like Jim L. Khalili in physics now are doing experiments on biologic systems. That's the kind of stuff you need. Where you need to start looking is where the action is. What's eventually going to happen? I think physicists are going to change biology very quickly. My job, how I see medicine changing, is from the outside, not in. Why do I spend time with a guy named Tristan in Ecuador versus going to a neurosurgery conference and talk to 500 to 600 neurosurgeons? Because they're not going to believe what I'm telling you right now. They don't know any physics. They're not willing to take time away from putting pedicle screws in someone's back to read this book. But I promise you, when they do, you know who's gonna change it? Tristan's gonna go back to California, herniated disc, go into one of their offices, and they're gonna say, okay, we're gonna put screws and rods in your back, and you're gonna go, hey, stop. No thanks. I know better. People can take control of their health by talking to that little doctor in the head. That's the reason you left California and went to Ecuador. You don't realize it, but that's exactly what happened. I'm telling you, the change in medicine is going to come from people like you. It's going to come from people that are on my forum. It's going to come from the lay public. Why? Because all of you are pissed off about your interaction with my profession. Why? Because you know that we don't have the fundamental secret sauce. Here's the best news of this podcast. Dudes, it's there. It's time for you to realize that the information is there. If you want to know more about it, all you got to do is read those books and then start reading some of my blogs, and you'll start seeing that, wow, these aren't hard to understand. They're actually pretty easy because now you have new eyes in which to see it. And that's the key. See, the thing is, the lenses that we see life through are what we see. And you don't realize that quantum physics allows you to change that perspective very fast. That's what we call a quantum superposition. And once your perspective has been changed, it opens up a whole new reality to you. Now, we're using hyperbole and different semantics of these words. That's exactly what quantum physics says happens. There's alternate realities. What is an alternate reality? It's called a choice, okay? You all have a choice to control your environment in a different way. When you change your environment, what do? You create an alternate reality for your biology. That's fundamentally what we're talking about here.
So how do people start to apply some of this stuff? I mean, like what did you do differently than Jimmy Moore did to allow you to lose the weight and to allow you to maintain it?
I limit my blue light exposure. I limit my non-native EMF, but guess what? When I do things like we're doing right now and I'm exposing myself, or I'm in an operating room and I've got a fluoro machine, those are the times that I do extraordinary things to overcome. That's when I do crazy CT. That's when I'll go out in the sun and eat a shitload of oysters. You know, I will do things days of my life that I expose my body to more blue light than I won't in other times. That's the reason why I realize that some days I have to be more like a plant or a tree. Some days I have to be more like a sea mammal. And that's the point that I'm trying to tell you. Since we can change our environment, there's going to be days where Tristan and I live on the equator, but through my choices, I'm really living up in Sweden at the top of, you know, the Arctic Circle when it's completely dark. Do I use light in order to do that? Yeah, you know that. I use red light tremendously to help me get well. Here's the irony. No one in medicine seems to know that red light works, but guess who uses it all the time to help animals? Vets. Are animals alive like we are, bro? Yep. And you know what? No one looks at light as a drug. I got news for you. It's the most powerful drug on this planet. You need to go to your natural drug dealer called the sun and nighttime and start getting your fixes. That's what I'm telling you. Especially a guy like you. You're getting your fix as soon as you go outside where you live, around that equator. People, our species is not doing that now, bro. They're just not. And they need to fundamentally understand that technology keeps you inside in a place that you don't want to be, around blue light and microwaves constantly. Mm-hmm. You need to get outside and be the wild animal that you are and stop being the zoo animal. And listen, every single person is drawn to this technology stuff because, look, you can live off the grid in Ecuador and make money doing what you're doing where you're doing it. You couldn't do that 200-300 years ago. So there is a good side to technology.
15 years ago, it was much harder too.
Right. And you know, the thing that I'm trying to tell people is, like, I get that there's a good side to it and I get why people are drawn to it. I'm just trying to open your box to realize that there's a bigger downside that most people don't want to see. Why? Because it's going to change your life in a big way.
Well, I mean, there's a huge influx of like neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, things like ADHD in kids. And if you look at how people live their lives and what they're doing, I mean, they're sitting in front of television for entertainment. That's what we do for fun and for kicks now. People watch TV.
No, I don't watch that. And you know, it's even worse. It's even worse if you were back here in the States and see what's happening now. You see women in a mall pushing their newborn babies, you know, that are 1, 2, 3 years old with cell phones. The kids have cell phones and they have iPads because they're doing, you know, games to help their brains. And I'm sitting there going, this is the worst thing in the world. That we're turning our kids into freaking zombies, and nobody realizes it.
Well, I mean, I grew up playing video games, playing Nintendo, and that's what we did. That's what we wanted.
I didn't have that. So you come from a different generation. That's why also my message for guys in your generation is a tough swallow, because I grew up without a cell phone, I didn't play video games. I was outside playing baseball, basketball, and hockey in the sun. Yeah. And yet even though the beginning part of my life was lived probably the right way, it was still done in New York City, which was not good. But I still got sick later on in my life. And the point I'm trying to make to you is that guys like you in your generation are going to get sicker faster. That's the reason why we're seeing these diseases now show up in kids your age. And, you know, it just came out of the blue. And if you go back, again, here's the key point. Go back to read Energy and Epigenetics 4. Just read the first 3 or 4 chapters. Because, dude, that's the world, Tristan, you were born into. You don't even know what the world was like past 1950. And I'm telling you, bro, you need to realize how much things change. And you know what happens? Every year we go further, it changes even more. Not for our benefit either. That's the reason why I've told people, if you look at the coupling of NHANES data, which is obesity data, every time there's a 10% increase in technology spending, there's a 1% increase in obesity rates. And nobody can explain it, but we just did in this podcast. And I want people to realize that you can gain some valuable insight from epidemiologic studies. It's not correlation and causation, but it tells you about how things are coupled or uncoupled. And that's really what you wanted to talk about today. And that's what we've talked about. This whole idea of coupling and uncoupling is hugely important, because when you fundamentally understand how biology works, I told people in the April webinar I just did, and I used a very simple example to explain it. When you uncouple biology, you are basically losing your negative feedback control of those 2 cycles. So what does that mean? It means I want you to think about a predator and a prey. Do you know how you extinct a predator and a prey? All you have to do is affect one and not the other. Why? Because they rely on each other. So if you take the prey away from the predator, because the predator eats it a lot, what happens? They both die eventually. People don't realize that's what negative feedback control is. See, that's why alligators don't always get all the wildebeest. That's the reason why all shark attacks don't lead to death. It's the reason why, and it's also the reason why the flip side happens. Everything in biology is coupled. When you lose that uncoupling, both things extinct themselves. Both things. And people don't think about it like that. You know, we have those abilities in us to extinct ourselves. And we are currently doing just that. And we don't realize that we're doing it because we've lost the negative feedback control of cycle 1 and cycle 2. What is that? It's called light, bro. Natural sunlight that's behind your left shoulder. Why? Because we like blue light. We are addicted to blue light because of our choices. And this
There's other ways that we disconnect from our environment also. I mean, deforestation, I mean, when you said how demonstrated how we're so coupled with trees, we cut them all down and we pave the roads with concrete. We chop down forests and we build skyscrapers. Well,
you know what effect that has? Again, you're going to hear about this in the coming blogs. Mm-hmm. It affects the albedo. You know what the albedo is? It's the solar radiations. When you cut trees down, you change the amount of infrared light that's stored in the tectonic plates that affects groundwater. All right, stop there for a minute. Think about all the coupling we just talked about right there. That's water that Tristan and his family will drink. It's the same water that's no longer present in California or Texas for that reason. People don't realize the way we've handled the earth has tremendous effects. See, people don't understand. Little small changes lead to massive effects. You know why? Because it's quantized. Everything on the universe is made of atoms. That means everything is quantized. Problem is, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Okay? And the thing is, when you begin to have this perspective, you start looking at things that are going around in your country, in your local environment, at a micro level. I call our system the quantized ecosystem. I talk to you about how atoms are recycled in you when you're uncoupled. That's how you get the diseases you get. People aren't thinking about that. And I'm going to force you to come to my level. Why? Because then you're going to begin to see that maybe I'm right. And then maybe you do have power to change your biology. It's not that hard. It just changes. All it takes is a change in perspective. That's it.
So for somebody who lives in a city, somebody who lives in a place like New York, whose life is tied into to an environment that's kind of disconnected from natural cycles and that it's bathed in artificial light, and EMF with smart meters. They've got television for their entertainment on all the time. What can somebody like that do to
you just have to mitigate it's kind of what we talked about before. I do extraordinary things the days that I'm affected. If you're in a city, you just need to do more than a guy like you needs to do. You got it easier. Why? You found it. If you would have to make a lot of money to live in California right now to do all the mitigation things that I'm teaching people to do here in the States. Yeah. Magnetico is expensive. Getting a constant source of seafood in California is not a cheap thing to do. Getting water appropriately right now in California is becoming probably one of the most difficult things to do. They're getting ready to be shell-shocked. I've made the prediction that water will cost more than food very shortly in California. Same thing's going to be true in Texas. Nobody sees what I see. And all you got to do is look. And you got to realize, I tell people this all the time. I'm going to tell you this right now because you were on the food kick. If I put you in the middle of a desert in Ecuador or anywhere right now, you can live 30 days without food, but you can only live 7 days without water. I want you to think about that for a minute. You still think food is incredibly important. Water is actually more important than even food. And we haven't even broached that subject. Guess what? That's a huge issue. Why? Because what is water? It's part of the photosynthetic battery, isn't it? It's how solar radiation stores its charge in water. Well, guess what? That's really important for a dude that lives around the equator. It's also going to be really important for people who live in California who have no water soon to deal with. Why? You can eat all the nutritional ketosis you want, bro, but if you ain't got water, you ain't going to be around much longer. It's as simple as that.
What's the problem with drinking something like tap water that's treated with chlorine and fluoride and has, artificial chemicals added to it?
Well, here's the irony. You're probably going to be surprised what I'm going to say. When you lose your groundwater in California, that may be the only choice you have. So guess what? You're going to have to do it. That's when we're talking about not optimal. We're talking about survival. Yeah. There's a difference, and I know that's not generally what you focus on, but it is a point. I know you got a lot of family that live in California, and as we talk about this, you're probably going through your mind, what are they going to do? How is this going to be an issue? I mean,
this has been a long time coming. Before we left, I mean, you drive by the reservoirs and you can see they're empty. It was pretty obvious 5, 6, 7 years ago that this was going down. I mean, and the same thing with the whole EMF situation was just going out of control. The smart meters were being put up. We had close friends who were getting really sick when the smart meters were forced upon them, and then chronic conditions started to surface. So it's like these were things that we did understand that they were going on. We didn't really know as much as we know about it now, but this was part of the reason why we left. It was just It became unsustainable. We just didn't feel safe as human beings to live there. It just didn't feel like it was going to last.
But back then, did you know about all these quantum mechanisms, or did
no way? It was just you need good food, good water. That like if you can't afford, I mean, we were having to fill up these like 5-gallon jugs of reverse osmosis water all the time because we couldn't. And
I think that's what's coming to your family. You want to know the truth? Where I see things going, the number one thing that's going to happen in California very soon is that they're going to lose their focus on all the bullshit that they're focused on. They're going to build desalination plants.
Yeah.
Out in California. Because they're going to have to. And right now, this is the most ironic part. The crazy people in the Middle East, they realize they needed these plants. They built them, and we only have one in the United States, and the U.S. military uses it. That's it. It's not used for the general population. Mm-hmm. But I got news for you. My prediction in the 2016 election is going to be that water is going to become a huge topic. Why? Because, a big part of the country lives in California. And people think that this problem is going away. I've been pretty clear for 10 years telling people it's going to get worse before it gets better. And it's going to get a lot worse. And I think it's going to happen over 8 decades. And I think this is going to have huge ramifications because most of the organic vegetables that we get in this country come from California. Well, right now, it's a dust bowl out there. They can't get the food. When we stop making food, that's when I think people are going to realize that we got a big problem. We got a really big problem. And people are going to start making choices kind of like you did because they have to. See, you sensed it before. And I hope, maybe this podcast goes to some of your family out in California and said, look, you just need to listen to this. You may not see what I see. You may not understand why I did what I did. But now there's guys out there that are plugging this science together, because if you just get on Google and start Googling some of this stuff, you're going to see that this isn't hyperbole that you and I are talking about. This is reality.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And when you think about one of the big crops in California is almonds and how much water they soak up. So the price of your little paleo cupcakes, those are going to go up. People are not going to be able to afford their paleo.
People don't realize almonds require huge amounts of water. So that's going to go by the wayside. There's going to be so many, changes that are coming. It's also part of the reason why I think you're also going to have to start making your own sustainable farm at your house. If you live in California right now, I would tell you that you need to do that. But the problem is you can't have a farm if you don't have water, and pretty soon you're not going to have water out there. And I think there's going to be a mass exodus over the next 50 to 80 years, because the way I think this is headed, the problem is only going to get worse from here. And we're talking decades. We're not talking, hey, it's going to snow, next year. This is a big deal. You're going to see massive population shifts in the United States over the next 5 to 8 decades. It's going to affect medicine. It's going to have ripple effects throughout the whole economy. The government knows it's coming. They just want to keep most of the people dumb enough, long enough, until it becomes obvious to anybody. And that's part of the reason why we've got a lot of fake foods. Why? We need the fake foods because we can't make enough real food for the people that we have in the country. And when you really scale it globally, got 9 billion people on this planet, that we already outstrip our supply of what really the earth can give. So that tells you that, guess what? Nature is going to take out quite a few humans in the next 100 years. I don't believe 100 years from now, we're going to have 9 billion people on the planet. I think we're going to thin it in a big way, and I think it's going to happen with or without people making changes. The key thing is when people begin to realize that this stuff, this physics is happening at a solar radiation level, at a water level, at the food chain level, at these coupled systems that we all talked about before, then they're going to realize they're going to have to make some hard decisions if they want to remain on this planet.
It's almost like our behavior is like self-regulating the population. We disconnect from the water supply. We dam up rivers. We take out the groundwater. We frack with it.
Want to hear something funny? As soon as you said that, if you want to realize something, do you know that leaves on trees self-regulate their photosynthetic capacity? You know that. There's three ways.
They'll kill themselves off, the ones at the bottom of the tree that dry up and wither off.
There's actually 3 ways they do it. It's called stomatal openings. You're going to hear about it in the series coming up. Trust me. But you're going to realize that even plants are quantized to be smart, but humans aren't because of the choices we make. We get in the way of nature and do not allow it to function in us, and we don't realize it. The ultimate ignorance of our species is that we think we're smarter than we are.
Oh, it's smarter than nature. We think that we're more intelligent than nature. No, it's absolutely insane.
It is.
When you just think of the effect of damming up a river, this is an insane behavior. Beavers do it small scale, but look, the way that we treat our natural environment is insane. We take non-native species of trees, transplant them from Australia to Ecuador, dry up all the soil, dry up the groundwater, and completely destroy the ecosystem here. There's nowhere that's perfect. Look at what we do in the Amazon rainforest with mining and, the Ecuadorian government selling off mineral rights as well as, oil to oil companies like Kinross from Canada.
Right. It's happening everywhere. And the thing is, people don't really see this. Remember, we said earlier that the whole world is quantized. Everything's connected. All these coupled systems that you're talking about have huge effects for us, but we don't see it. I kid you not when I tell you that the atoms that were once in a T-Rex are actually in you. They've been recycled many times over. That's what a quantized ecosystem is designed to do. And the thing is, when you don't allow that recycling to occur, bad things happen. And those bad things are happening to our species right now, unbeknownst to our species, because they don't have that 30,000 foot perspective yet. And I guess what I'm hoping is that when people learn a little bit about photosynthesis and they learn a little bit about the quantized mechanisms in our mitochondria, they're going to begin to realize there's a way bigger story here than just optimal health. You know, kind of why I'm passionate about what I am, because it opens your eyes to many things that you never saw before. And that's key.
And I think a lot of people might be thinking, oh, this is so negative. This is so, you know, it might sound daunting to them. But look, this is why I like having Jack on. Jack's not going to come on here and tell you what you want to hear. I'm not going to come on here like a cute little frat boy and smile and tell you how much my new book is helping everybody and tell you a bunch of BS. Like, we're here to be real with you and actually share the way we see the world and the way we see things going. And a lot of the people, if you're still watching this is resonating with you and you actually understand what's going on to a certain extent. So it's not about like, you know, crippling up in fear and thinking, oh, we're all going to die. This is about taking advantage of the situation that we have and actually doing what we can to mitigate the damage that we're already doing just by living the lives that we're living.
Well, notice what I also said. There's going to be a thinning of the herd, but here's the key thing. Who's going to remain? The people. It happens in every survivor game. Just think about it. The people that make the correct decisions initially are the ones that generally survive. So why did you have me on the podcast? We talked about uncoupled biology. The more coupled that you live, you're going to be one of those people. So fundamentally, you're giving people the out card. In other words, you just open the fortune cookie and there it is. See, here's how I'm going to leave it. And we're going to end on this. Okay. Because I got to take my kids to brunch, you know, here in New Orleans. Low carb, high fat, paleo, modern medicine, they're half truths. When you have half truths, you get a whole lie because you don't have the whole part of the story. Why is that? Because you don't have the negative feedback control. You become that predator with no prey. You have nothing to eat anymore. And when you have nothing to eat, you die too. So you need to realize you need to be at peace with your own quantized ecosystem where you live, and you need to get with the program. If you don't, Mother Nature has a game plan to get back at you. She will make you pay a biologic toll, and that toll will be some sort of disease that will make you part of the group that survives and part of the group that does not. And it's that simple. It's not really difficult to understand.
There we go. So where can people find you, Jack?
JackKruse.com. You can find me on Amazon, the Epi Paleo Prescription. Eventually, I got 2 other books that are already done, but I'm kind of waiting for them. We got a movie coming out called Supercharged. I go all over the world to give talks. I'll probably be going to Amsterdam in the next couple of months to give a talk to orthomolecular medicine. You know, I've been to Tokyo. I've been to Manila. My goal is to give this information to as many people. And Tristan, I just hope you continue to do what you're doing. I hope people who are listening to this, if you're affected by this, just share it with people. Because look, we're all in this together. If we help each other, dude, that's what it's all about. And, you know, that's why I do what I do. My goal is to really just give you horizontal gene transfer through thoughts. And if you heard anything, and however long this podcast went, you know, just share it, because we're all part of the same community. You don't have to like me to get the message. You really don't. I just want to make sure that you do get the message, because I think it's important for us all to ponder and think about.
And check out Jack's blog. Check out his book. You can probably find him on social media and bug him with some questions, and he'll answer them if they're good ones. But all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and go find Jack. Check out his work. He's one of the few people that I think is worth having on the show again, and that I think is worth listening to or talking to. I don't listen to any health or podcasts by any of these other people, because it doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't vibe with me. It's just Jack's one of the few real characters out there that's actually that I think he actually gets a big part of the picture, and that he cares. So thanks for coming on, Jack, and for caring so much and for sharing your thoughts and being so open, man.
No problem, dude. Make sure you get a purple jacket next time.
I know. Well, where'd you get that? Where can I find that? Did you rob Liberace's grave?
You can bring you back to the States for the cruise, bro, and I'll take you right to the store where I got it.
He's going to bring me to a graveyard and be a headstone that says Liberace. There's a skeleton sitting next to it.
All right, man. I'll see you.